Now we've got James Franklin showing up at his news conference. And what do we make of this? To be fair, we could just pile on James Franklin for the next half hour easily.
I'm down.
And you're down for that. And it's been done on social media. But to be fair, as we all have, I get on here, and after I've talked for 5 or 6 hours, I certainly say all sorts of things come out of my mouth where I misplaced, John Harbaugh for Jim Harbaugh, and then somebody calls me an idiot because I don't know who Jim Harbaugh is. Well, obviously I do, and so forth and so on. So you can misspeak, but when it's 3 times in the course of 10 minutes, you wonder where the guy's mind is, especially when we hear that he has switched agents, Tony.
I mean, it sure seems like he's got one foot out the door. I think what I've been saying is he's almost coaching himself out of a job, and not the Penn State job, but the USC job or the LSU job, where like things need to get better unless the back channels have already confirmed everything. But it is interesting, and I wonder if he'll come out and apologize or clarify some stuff. But Mark, you have a bunch of different shows, so you can misspeak. But if you just have one show where you talk about last week's opponent and this week's opponent, how often are you going to confuse the two? You probably not that often. Maybe once as a misspeak, but then to continue to like if he's thinking about Illinois, I can imagine that staying with you. But when you have Ohio State up next, you've got to leave that behind. Like you can't take Illinois even into Sunday. You've got to be worried about Ohio State, unless he's not worried about anything anymore, and he's more concerned about who's going to be his assistant staff at USC. And like I said yesterday on another show, let's see where one of the first things that we learn about in terms of coaching searches is when the rumors pop up about the coach's wife house shopping in some other city. So let's see where James Franklin's family shows up in the next week or two in terms of the housing market. And then we'll have a better idea, and maybe that will explain some of his confusion right now.
You ask where his mind is. It's in the back of a Mayflower truck to a destination unknown at this point. And I spoke to a buddy of mine who covers Penn State who's like, oh, well, James, has been known to kind of misspeak like that before. I'm like, He's like, I know. It sounded good to me too. So, yeah, I don't know if his mind is where it needed to be at that point, but I'm also sure that, like most coaches, he just does not really give a flying you-know-what about talking to the media. So, his mind could have been lost in the playbook or trying to figure out this or trying to figure out that, but it certainly is a bad look and, certainly gives guys like us something to talk about because, again, doubling down twice and saying playing Illinois and playing in the big house or what? I mean, that's just a mess, man. That's just a mess and not necessarily a good look for a coach that, through his career, certainly done a good job of recruiting, but I think a lot of people have kind of questioned some late game calls, and this kind of plays right into it about his attention to detail.
Yeah, and the very best in the business do understand the big picture and the treetop CEO role, but they do pay attention to the details too. That's what makes the great ones great, is they can do both or get the right people in place to take care of both. Steve, you got to have some thoughts on James Franklin's faux pas here from yesterday.
Yeah, I'm not sure what he was thinking or what was going through his mind as he was speaking yesterday, just a little disheveled. And, I go back to Saturday, just a weird, goofy, crazy game. And we're driving, seemed like it took all day. It should take about 4 hours to get from Columbus to Bloomington.
Oh, no.
We left Columbus at 10:45, and I think we pulled in to the stadium lot about 4:45, so that was 6 hours. Now, we did stop at Buffalo Wild Wings near Dayton for about 45 minutes and got some food about 12 o'clock, and we watched the first quarter of all the different games on TV, and then we got back on the road. So it was an extra hour and 15 minutes of travel time, basically, because of the 2 construction problems we ran into. And so we're listening on Sirius, and we're kind of going between that game and the Michigan game, the Cincinnati game. and the Oklahoma game. So we had 4 games we were trying to monitor. And so we eventually end up on the Illinois game. And it was just curious that Penn State needed one play to put the game away like 10 different times and couldn't make it. And you just wonder, like, what's going on there? Because Illinois, I mean, they've had a terrible year. I mean, they lost to Texas San Antonio. I know they're still undefeated. I don't know. It just, how do you lose at home to Illinois? I mean, it just, when you're Penn State and again, the injury to the quarterback changed their season, and it's been unfortunate. And so, they're not going to get there this year. And I think that, they have 2 losses in the Big Ten. They have about a 1% chance of winning the Big Ten. They have to win out, which is not going to happen. And they have to hope that Penn State, Michigan, and Michigan State also lose another game on top of that. So they somehow get into a tie with 2 losses and win the tiebreaker because they beat them all. So I don't know. It's not going to happen. It certainly isn't going to happen. And, more likely it's looking like a 7-5 type season for them. And is this a case where Penn State just says at the end of the year, go ahead and pursue whatever you want, we'll let you out of your contract, go type thing. And they just part, as friends and let it go at that. But he's got a great setup at Penn State. They've recruited very well. They just don't have, they're always a player or 2 short of taking it that next level. And he did win they beat Memphis in the Cotton Bowl there a few years ago. So he did get a New Year's 6 win in there somewhere, which is a small feather that you put in your hat. He did win 1 Big Ten championship and
Fiesta Bowl.
Yeah.
Against Washington.
They beat Penn State or beat Washington in the Fiesta Bowl. So he's got 2. That's good. Whatever. He put that program back on solid ground after the Paterno thing, and Bill O'Brien didn't really work out very well. So, whoever he hands it off to would be in really good shape, I think, if he decides to leave. I am just not of a mind that he leaves. I just think that, there's something to be said for comfortability. He's 8 years in there. He could probably do another 8 years standing on his head, there. So, and then retire probably. So, I don't know what he aspires to be. Is that shiny object in Los Angeles all that shiny? I don't know. LSU has won 3 national championships in the last 17, 18 years with 3 different head coaches. You can get there from here, but, you're only going to beat Alabama about once every 4 years. So that when you do, you got to make that one count. So as Joe Burrow did. So I don't know. The grass seems like it's always greener on the other side, but I'm not so sure in this case. I think he's got a good thing going there at Penn State. If they'll overlook what's happened this year, and he can explain it away with the quarterback injury. And then the transfer portal. So I think he stays, to be honest with you.
I think it'd be easier to win at USC than deal with Ohio State, though. And I wonder how much that bothers him, like that roadblock that is there. And you can continue to do what you're doing at Penn State. Is he happy with that? How long does Penn State kind of get tired of that, especially if there's a 7-win season mixed in there or something? So I think it'll be interesting to see what he wants. And because you're not going to beat Ohio State, you said, like, it's like LSU and Alabama, you beat them once every 4 years. If you beat Ohio State once every 4 years, then you better be ready to then capitalize on that. James Franklin did it, and Ohio State still went to the playoffs. So even when he beats Ohio State, he can't capitalize on it. So, I just wonder if Ohio State has worn him out there.
Yeah, and I'll say that he had his little speech about being an elite team or whatever, and, he kind of painted himself into a bit of a corner because they haven't become elite. If anything, they've kind of regressed. So, and I'm not saying that he's on a pitch count at Penn State and that he needs to be looking over his shoulder, but he could go somewhere else and start the clock over and try to rebuild. I mean, there certainly is some talent on the Penn State roster, but I certainly see some deficiencies as well. And you go somewhere like California, if you go to SC and you're recruiting against Oregon, and Oregon now, Mario Cristobal could end up at LSU. So you could have a pretty good power vacuum out there to where you step in and become somebody who is able to not have to recruit head to head against Ohio State as often and be able to get all these kids that are west of the Rockies. And I'm not saying you move just to move, but maybe you have gotten to the point of where you've just hit your head against that wall so many times that it's like, well, maybe it's time to move on. I've heard stories that there's certainly some frustration with James toward the administration and the administration toward James. And, I don't know how much I buy this one, that one, or another one. But, if I've heard the stories, I'm sure other people have heard the stories too. So there is something to be said about a fresh start.
It's a lot of upheaval when you change coaches because you got to basically hire 40 new people to help run the program, and it's just a mess. And I mean, I don't know. I guess happy with where you are, or if I was really serious about USC, I mean, you have to get a long-term contract for a lot of money because they what have they fired 3 coaches at midseason in the last 10 or 11 years? I mean, what was it? Kiffin, Sarkisian. Now Sarkisian was for cause, obviously, because he was a disaster. But and then Helton, I don't know. It just they don't seem to want to stick with anybody longer than about 2.5 years. And although Helton probably lasted about 4 or 5, as I think about it, but I don't know. It's like guys go there and wear out their welcome and, lose games to other mediocre Pac-12 teams and they fire them. So I don't know. To me, it just doesn't seem like it's that great of a job. And
I was just going to say, do you want to go in though, already planning your escape plan? I mean, I know we all joke, all guys joke, oh, make sure you sign a prenup or whatever, but this sounds like a coaching prenup that you're already planning what happens if you bomb out. I mean, these guys have tremendous egos. Well, that happened to those guys, but I'm going to turn this, around. So
yeah,
I understand. I agree 1,000%. It is a pain in the blank to have to sit there and who is going to be my associate to my associate director of football operations, and you can only bring so many people with you, and there's a lot to it. But
you got to have 5 people to inflate the balls, 5 people to polish the footballs, 5 people to bag up the footballs. You got to have 5 people for every job at these major. I mean, you can't spend $200 million by accident. I mean, it's got to be willfully done.
If there's somebody I think that would do well dealing with Snoop Dogg and Will Ferrell dropping by practice, I think it's James Franklin. Everybody's like, well, Urban Meyer, prior to Jacksonville and blah, 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 blah. Urban Meyer would blow a gasket if somebody came in and, Will Ferrell showed up dressed in uniform, runs out there to try and take a play. Urban would probably take his head off. But I think James Franklin, just his personality and his demeanor, I mean, I think that he's somebody who fits the SEC, the USC job better than most.
Yeah. I also think the LSU job is interesting, not just because you can win there, but because Nick Saban's not going to be at Alabama much longer. And that makes the LSU job even better because you'll no longer have to worry about him. And whoever steps into that job will have their own kind of situation at Alabama.
James Franklin has basically succeeded at the same level that Joe Paterno succeeded his final 5 or 6 years. If you look at Joe Paterno's final 5-6 years, it roughly mirrors what James Franklin's doing. He's fielding top 10 to 15 teams in the country, but he's not able to get over the hump and get to the Big Ten championship game other than the 2016 situation. But now it's been what's going on 5 consecutive years of being clearly the second best team in the division, if not the conference, and with the second best athletes, that has given Ohio State the most difficult time consistently. But and if they're okay with that, that's what they're going to be. Go 9-3, 10-2 most seasons, and get to a decent bowl game. But I also don't know that we should be giving James Franklin a ton of credit for stabilizing the program. To me, that goes to Bill O'Brien. Because for them to go 8-4, 7-5 after that situation, I thought was a minor miracle. And then James Franklin came in and took it from there.